The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents Talking Heathen. Hey everybody, lately there's been a bit of a mild dust-up between a few people I know and people I like and I'm friends with about the word heathen and how it's being used. In particular, there are objections to the atheist community of Austin using it in the name of one of our Sunday shows, Talk Heathen. Now, Rudy B., who's a co-host of the show, is in favor of changing the name and has given a couple reasons. And Ocean Keltoy has put out a video on it. And normally I wouldn't use the Atheist Debates Project to, it's all of a sudden we're dueling on the word heathen. But I think there's some interesting things here about the way people fell into this discussion and how bad arguments are being used in a way that might impact how we view debates and things as well. Now, first of all, disclaimers right off the bat. I am not in charge of Talk Heathen. I'm not in charge of the show. I'm not in charge of the name, never have been, don't have any say in it. So my opinion on whether or not Talk Heathen should change its name and how or why it should change its name isn't relevant. It's not going to impact anything, which is why I'm comfortable talking about it, because this is not going to impact anything. But I am in favor of changing the name of the show, but not for bad reasons. I'm fine with changing the name of the show if there are good reasons to change the name of the show, if it's for marketing purposes, there are things. And basically, Ocean and Rudy, in my opinion, have given bad reasons. I like both of them, but this isn't the way to make a point. And while Ocean did make a couple of cool points that I'll address, I don't know that it rises to the level of renaming the show. In quick summary in a tweet, Rudy's case was essentially in part that we're using a label that is also used by a smaller group, and it's wrong for us to kind of keep it from them. And Ocean's case was more that it sows confusion about the label and makes it more difficult for religious heathens, pagans, to find each other. So what's the deal? I would love to not reference a dictionary here at all. Ocean and I agree that they describe usage and they don't just prescriptively dictate how a word should or must be used. But there's still important information in the dictionary entries and in the etymology and historical usage of the terms. If we take a look at the history of the words pagan and heathen, they used to mean very similar things, and what they used to mean isn't what either of them mean now in the pagan community and in the heathenry community. Neither of them conform to Ocean's current use for modern paganism. The two words used to mean things like outsider, inhabiting the open country, the people who aren't civilized, the wild people, people of the land, people of the hearth, people of the heath. There's even a dictionary entry that talks about the history of the usage, and this is the only kind of appeal to the dictionary that I'm going to make at all, and it's not saying it's the way it should be, but it says a pagan, a Gentile, one who worships idols or is unacquainted with the true God. In the scriptures, the word seems to comprehend all nations except the Jews or Israelites, as they were all strangers to the true religion and all addicted to idolatry. The word may now be applied perhaps to all nations except to Christians and Mohammedans. And pagan then meant non-believer. Now, for anybody who's saying, it says they were all addicted to idolatry, the thing you have to remember is that an atheist like myself, from this point of view of Christians, I am an idolater as well. I either worship myself, my intellect, or Satan, depending on which ones you talk to. Now, as the dictionary describes, it doesn't dictate, so we don't have to stick with those usages at all. I completely agree. But Ocean makes the case that in the past century or so, there's been an attempt by neo-pagans to retake, or perhaps just take, the word heathen in the way that they took the word pagan. And that's cool. Language is there for us to play with, and we can all use it. But you don't get to just argue that there's been a movement in the past century or so, and that now takes precedence over the full history of the term. If you take a look at, as I did, the King James Version of the Bible, I did a lot of research on this. The word pagan, by the way, does not appear at all in the King James Version of the Bible, but heathen does. And this is its primary foundation for modern usage. When you take a look at its usage in literature, and you can do this with a Google search on prevalence of word usage in books, the peak usage of the term was in print was in 1841, and it represented 0.002% of words. It continued to decline in its usage until it reached its lowest usage in 1986 of 0.000089% of words in literature. And as of 2019, it had climbed back up a little bit to 0.002%, a full order of magnitude less than its height in 1841. This is not a common or popular word. This is not a particularly big deal. But I was interested in how it was used in the King James, because that's where we get to how it applies to me and other heathens who aren't pagans. If we look at the King James Version, in the Old Testament, there are 145 verses with 150 instances of the word heathen. The word that's used there is Hebrew 1471, which is goy. Now, goy is used 559 times in total in the Old Testament. Only 150 times is that word translated as heathen. The other 409 times, the word is translated as Gentile, nation, etc. Clearly, the Old Testament usage of the Hebrew word goy, that is translated sometimes as heathen, is there to say a non-Jew, and essentially because it's Christians that did this manipulating of Hebrew afterwards, a non-Christian, someone who isn't a Judeo-Christian. And heathen is used in particular when we want to use it as a slur, when we want to use it as, these are the particularly awful or egregious or terrible or, non-Jews and non-Christians there. In the New Testament, there are two different words that are translated as heathen in English. There's 164 total usages of these two terms, but only 7 times are these two terms translated as heathen. One of them is the Greek 1482, which is ethnikos, which is usually translated Gentile, is only translated as heathen twice, and that's in Matthew. Matthew's written a little differently than a lot of the rest of the New Testament. And of all the other instances, 162 of them, I think, only 5 times is the other word, which is the Greek 1484, which is ethnos, which means race or tribe or foreign, Gentile, heathen, nation, people. Only 5 times is that translated as heathen. And all of those instances where the words are translated as heathen, they're trying to disparage those foreigners, those Gentiles. It is a mild slur for the people who aren't us, the people who aren't as civilized. And when you look at the origins of the words, it very much was kind of these are the outsiders. These are the people who aren't the city folk. These are the people who have strange ways that are not ours. Now, in the video that Ocean put together, he's fine with atheists using the term amongst themselves, just not in marketing or show name sense, which is an admission that there is a context in which the term applies to atheists. He just doesn't want it used in the name of shows because, as he notes, it makes it more difficult for pagan heathens to find each other. Imagine if a Scientology group posted a video claiming that my use of the hang up as a show title somehow made it more difficult for Scientologists to find each other, or if Jains did it, or the Amish did it, or the Wiccans did it. My response would be, good. I'm in favor of people advocating for irrational religious beliefs having difficulty finding each other. It's not my job, nor is it my interest, to make it easier for people with superstitious beliefs to find each other, especially when the word that they're objecting to isn't theirs, is one that applies to all of us. Now, Ocean's strongest point, and I agree with this quite a bit, is that the word in Talk Heathen doesn't adequately describe what the show is. Fair point. He'd be even more right if his preferred usage of the word heathen was what the show intended, but it isn't. In the King James, for example, goy is translated as heathen. The word has been used to describe all non-Judeo-Christians since then. The usage for the show Talk Heathen is clear in the closing remarks that have traditionally been along with the show, and that is the show exists for those people who have traditionally been othered, dismissed, disparaged, because they are not part of the Judeo-Christian religion. That usage is correct, it's historically accurate, And it's not every other heathen's fault that some pagans want to make the word their own. Similar things have been done with barbarian and other words like that. In fact, on a recent episode of the Transatlantic Call-In Show, Rudy B., who tweeted about this and is a co-host on Talk Heathen, and someone I like Ocean, I like all these people, there's no raw fighting here, but when asked about who was or wasn't queer enough, made a brilliant response, essentially saying that whether or not they were queer enough for some queer folk, they were definitely queer enough to be marginalized by conservative evangelicals and queer phobes. It's strange that this great point didn't register when Rudy was considering who was or wasn't heathen enough. Now, as I said, I'm not the person who makes this decision. I'm in favor of changing the name, but only if it makes sense from a marketing standpoint and only if it's based on a good argument. But if you're making the argument, you're making it hard for pagans to find each other with the heathen label. That's not a good argument. You're using a word that a smaller marginalized group would like to use. Also, not a good argument. It's okay for you to use it to describe yourself among yourselves, but not in a public setting where someone else might associate it with a group I'm not fond of. Also isn't a good argument. In the end, I like the word. My Guitar Hero band name was Godless Heathens. I like using it in the same kind of edgy, pick up the slur and wear it like a mantle fashion that many people have done with the word queer and other terms. But this video isn't about the name of the show. It's about how many people believed they, like me, genuinely like Rudy and Ocean, and just gave them the benefit of the doubt and accepted their bad arguments as if they were good. And Ocean's point seems great. What if a heathen tuned into the show and thought you were talking about one thing, only to find out you were talking about another? And what if they called in to Talk Heathen thinking that, hey, this word's being used in a way that I don't understand? Oh no, whatever will we do? It's not like the entire history of the atheist movement. It's not like the entire history of call-in shows hasn't been about correcting people's misuse of terms or letting people know how we're using a term. The whole point is to educate. The whole point is to say, you know what? There are people who use heathen in this way. We're using it in this way. And we have a long history going back at least to the 1611, which predates the usage, the modern attempted usage of neo-pagans for heathenry, predates all of that, as this is the word that was used to other us. Now, it's not a particularly popular word. It's probably not a hill anybody needs to die on. And I honestly don't care whether or not Talk Heathen keeps the word or whether or not we end up changing it for some other reason. This is only about how we're going to make arguments and what kind of arguments we're going to make. And the fact that I thought it was ridiculous for somebody to say, you shouldn't use that word because it makes it more difficult for my religious friends to find each other. Now, maybe I'm not heathen enough for Ocean, but I'm heathen enough for the King James Version of the Bible and centuries of smugly superior bigots trying to other anyone who didn't fit their mold. I won't be allowing another group to do it, and definitely not with bad arguments. I'm a heathen. Get used to it. I'll keep using the label, whether any particular show does or not. And if that makes it more difficult for people with irrational beliefs to find each other, that's just a bonus. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.